Somewhere around 30,000 years ago, a wolf is sitting at the edge of a human camp, close enough to smell the fire, close enough to see the meat scraps someone just tossed aside, close enough to hear voices it has no way of understanding yet. Every instinct in its body should be screaming at it to run. Every wolf before it, for tens of thousands of years, had learned that humans meant danger. Spears, fire, a species that hunted everything it touched, including wolves themselves. This one doesn't run. Instead, it waits. And somewhere in that moment, repeated by countless wolves, over countless generations, in ways so small and gradual that no single wolf could have known what it was starting, something began that would end with one of those wolves' distant descendants, becoming the animal currently asleep on your couch right now, or waiting by your door, or resting its head on your lap without a second thought. This is the story of how humans turned one of the most dangerous predators on the planet into their best friend, and the honestly bizarre Soviet science experiment that finally proved how it happened. Here's the first surprise. Scientists genuinely don't agree on when this happened. Some genetic studies point to dog domestication beginning around 15,000 years ago. Others push the timeline back to 20,000, 30,000, even 40,000 years. Genuinely one of the most contested numbers in all of archaeology. Why such a huge range? Because unlike a stone tool, this animal started being a little friendlier. Doesn't leave an obvious mark in the fossil record. We're not looking for a single invention, we're looking for the beginning of a relationship. And relationships don't fossilize. The oldest widely accepted dog burial comes from a site called Bonn Oberkassel in Germany, dated to roughly 14,200 years ago. A dog buried alongside two humans, deliberately, with care. Not discarded. Buried like family. But an even older, more controversial candidate exists. Remains from Goyet Cave in Belgium, dated to around 36,000 years ago, that some researchers classify as an early dog based on skull shape. A shorter snout, a wider brain case, already diverging from wolves. Other researchers look at the exact same skull and say, that's just an unusual wolf. Same bones, completely different conclusions. Welcome to dog domestication research. For a long time, the popular story was simple. Humans found wolf pups, raised them by hand, and slowly bred the tamest ones. Humans as the active domesticators, wolves as the passive subjects. Most researchers today think that story is backwards. The leading theory now is called self-domestication, and it flips the entire narrative. It wasn't primarily humans choosing wolves. It was wolves choosing us. Here's how it likely worked. Early human camps produced waste. Bones, scraps, leftover meat. That waste was a free, reliable calorie source if you were bold enough to get close to it. Most wolves wouldn't risk it. Getting near humans was dangerous. But a small percentage of wolves, just by natural variation, were born with slightly lower fear responses. A little bolder, a little more tolerant of nearby movement and noise. Those wolves could feed on human scraps without their nervous system screaming at them to flee. And here's the key part. Being less afraid meant they could eat more reliably, survive better, and have more pups. Pups who inherited that same lower fear temperament. This wasn't humans selecting for tameness on purpose. It was survival itself selecting for tameness, generation after generation, entirely on its own. For decades, this was just a theory. Then a Soviet geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev decided to test it directly in one of the strangest and most important experiments in the history of animal science. Starting in 1959, Belyaev began breeding silver foxes. Not for fur, not for any commercial purpose. For exactly one trait: tameness. Every generation he selected only the calmest, least fearful foxes around humans and bred them together. That's it. That was the entire experiment. Select for tameness. Repeat. Within just a few generations, something happened that nobody fully expected. The tame foxes didn't just act friendlier, their bodies started changing. Floppy ears started appearing, a trait wild foxes essentially never have. Curly, wagging tails, piebald, patchy coat coloring, shorter, wider snouts. Some foxes even started barking. Belyaev had only ever selected for one thing: behavior. He never once selected for floppy ears or spotted coats. And yet selecting purely for tameness dragged all these physical traits along with it, generation after generation, like they were somehow biologically linked to the same underlying trait. This phenomenon now has a name: domestication syndrome. And it shows up, to varying degrees, in nearly every domesticated animal on Earth: dogs, cats, pigs, even domesticated rats. Which means those floppy-eared, patchy-coated dogs you see everywhere today. That's not really about looks. That's the physical fingerprint of tameness itself. Researchers eventually figured out part of why this happens. Selecting for tameness appears to affect a group of cells called neural crest cells. Cells that, incredibly, influence both the development of the adrenal glands that control fear and stress responses and the development of physical features like ear cartilage, tail structure, and coat pigmentation. Tame the fear response, and you accidentally tame the ears and tail right along with it. One underlying biological lever, controlling both. Evolution, it turns out, doesn't always design traits in isolation. Sometimes selecting for one thing pulls a whole bundle of unrelated-looking traits along for the ride, whether you meant to select for them or not. Just when you think the story's getting clean, genetics throws in another twist. Some genetic research suggests dog domestication may not have happened just once, in one place. A widely discussed 2016 study proposed a dual domestication hypothesis. The idea that wolves may have been independently domesticated by humans in both East Asia and Western Eurasia, with the Eastern lineage eventually spreading and partially replacing the Western one. Other researchers push back hard on this, arguing a single origin fits the genetic data better once you account for later interbreeding and migration. The honest answer? Again, we don't fully know. Dogs may have happened once. Dogs may have happened twice, in two different corners of the world, by two different groups of humans who had no contact with each other, arriving at the exact same relationship through the exact same process. As dogs moved deeper into human life, their bodies kept adapting, not just in temperament, but in something as basic as digestion. Wolves are obligate carnivores, built to process meat. But as dogs lived alongside early farming communities, many developed extra copies of a gene called AMY2B, which helps digest starch. Modern dogs can have up to 30 times more copies of this gene than wolves do. That's not a small tweak. That's dogs biologically adapting, over generations, to eat the same grain-heavy, agriculture-based diet their humans were eating. Their genome was quietly rewriting itself to match ours, meal by meal, generation by generation. Every time your dog eats kibble made partly from grain, that ability exists because their ancestors' bodies changed to keep pace with yours. There's one more piece of evidence that, if it's real, might be one of the most emotionally striking artifacts in all of archaeology. In Chauvet Cave in France, alongside some of the oldest known cave paintings on Earth, researchers found a set of footprints. A child, roughly 4 to 6 years old, walking alongside the tracks of a large canid, dated to potentially 26,000 years old. If those canid tracks belong to an early dog rather than a wolf, it means a child and a proto-dog walked side by side through a dark cave together, over 26,000 years ago, leaving a trail that would outlast every human who ever lived after them by tens of thousands of years. It's contested. It might be a wolf. But if it's not, that's one of the oldest recorded moments of the exact bond that still exists between a kid and a dog today. Here's a detail that surprises almost everyone the first time they hear it. Dogs are not descended from the wolves alive today. Genetic comparisons show that modern gray wolves and modern dogs share a common ancestor, but that ancestor population itself went extinct thousands of years ago. Modern wolves are, essentially, dogs' cousins, not their parents. Think about what that actually means. The wolf population that gave rise to every dog on Earth, Every golden retriever, every chihuahua, every stray wandering a street somewhere right now is gone. Extinct. We only know it existed because its genetic fingerprint is still readable inside the animals it left behind. Somewhere out there, tens of thousands of years ago, was a wolf population that no longer has a single living representative of its own kind, except, in a strange and roundabout way, in the form of every dog alive today. We touched on this earlier with von Oberkassel, but it's worth sitting with the full pattern. Ancient dog burials are not rare, isolated events. Archaeologists have found dog burial sites across multiple ancient cultures, spanning thousands of years, often treated with the same care given to human burials. Grave goods included, deliberate positioning, clear intention. At Kalniki, an ancient Mesolithic site, and at multiple sites across ancient Scandinavia and North America, dogs were buried individually, sometimes even in dedicated animal cemeteries, separate from where other animal remains were simply discarded as food waste. This distinction matters enormously to archaeologists. A discarded meal gets thrown in a midden with broken tools and animal bones. A member of the family gets buried deliberately with care. Across wildly different cultures, with no contact with each other, separated by thousands of years and thousands of miles, humans kept making the exact same choice about how to treat their dogs when they died. As dogs settled fully into human life, they didn't just become companions. They became infrastructure, tailored to whatever a given culture actually needed. In the Arctic, dogs became essential transportation, pulling sleds across terrain no human could cross alone, a partnership so vital that entire human survival strategies in extreme environments depended on it. In ancient Egypt, dogs held genuine cultural and religious significance, associated with the god Anubis, and sometimes mummified with the same care given to humans. Ancient Roman households kept guard dogs, with mosaic warnings, cave canem, beware of the dog, found preserved in doorways to this day. Across Mesoamerica, dogs were bred specifically for companionship, for food in some cultures, and for spiritual roles believed to guide the dead through the afterlife. Different continents, different religions, different climates, diets, and technologies entirely. And yet, almost every single early civilization we have real records of found their own version of the exact same idea. This animal belongs beside us, doing something we cannot do alone. Modern science has actually caught up to explain part of why this bond feels the way it does, and the explanation is almost unreasonably sweet. Researchers studying dog-human interaction found that when dogs and their owners make eye contact, both species experience a measurable spike in oxytocin, the same hormone responsible for bonding between human parents and infants. This is, as far as we know, extremely rare across species. Dogs appear to have essentially hijacked the same biological bonding loop that humans use to fall in love with their own children, and turned it into a two-way channel between an entirely different species. Wolves, notably, do not produce this same response with humans, even hand-raised ones. This appears to be something uniquely rewired in dogs over the entire span of their shared history with us. In other words, when your dog looks you in the eyes, your brain isn't imagining the connection. It's running the literal same chemistry as a parent bonding with a child. Here's a fact that surprises a lot of people. The huge variety of dog breeds we see today, from a Chihuahua to a Great Dane, is mostly not ancient at all. For the vast majority of dog domestication's history, dogs stayed relatively similar in size and shape, shaped mostly by function rather than appearance. A herding dog needed to be built one way, a sled dog another, a guard dog another, but there wasn't yet the extreme size and shape variation we see today. That changed dramatically in the Victorian era, roughly the 1800s, when formal dog breeding for appearance exploded into a genuine cultural obsession across Britain and Europe. Breed standards were written down, kennel clubs were formed, and selective breeding for very specific physical traits accelerated massively in a genuinely short window of time. a blink of an eye compared to the tens of thousands of years that came before it. In other words, the deep, ancient part of this story is about behavior and trust, built up with almost impossible slowness over tens of thousands of years. The wild diversity of shapes and sizes? That's a comparatively recent chapter, added on top of a foundation that took nearly the entirety of human history to build. Here's the part of this story worth sitting with for a moment. Dogs gave humans something extraordinary. An animal that through thousands of years of shared history learned to read human emotion, human pointing gestures, even human faces in ways no other species on Earth naturally does. Dogs didn't just become tame. They became tuned to us, specifically. And for most of that history, we mostly honored that. But it's worth acknowledging. That same trust has also been exploited in cruel breeding practices that prioritized appearance over an animal's actual health, in abandonment, in outright neglect. The bond that took tens of thousands of years to build is not indestructible, and it's not automatic. The wolf that first sat at the edge of that firelight took a genuine risk on us. Every dog since has, in a sense, kept taking that same risk. So, back to that wolf at the edge of the firelight, tens of thousands of years ago, deciding not to run. We don't know its name, obviously. We don't know if it ever got close enough to be fed by hand, or whether it was one of thousands of wolves who took that same risk over thousands of years before the relationship truly took hold. Generation after generation of small, uncertain steps towards something neither species could have predicted. But we know how the story ends, because it's still ending. Every single day. In millions of homes around the world, in a bond that somehow survived tens of thousands of years, multiple ice ages, the rise and fall of entire civilizations, and the complete extinction of the very wolf population that started it all. That wolf's decision not to run is the reason a dog might be lying near your feet right now, or waiting by the door for you, or leaning its head into your hand without you even asking, running on the exact same ancient bonding chemistry that a parent feels holding their own child. Every single one of those moments has a direct, unbroken line back to a wild animal that looked at a human fire. And for reasons we're still piecing together, thousands of generations later, chose to stay.